appreciate all the witnesses here today and Ranking Member Norton for holding this hearing. We are well aware that transit agencies across the country, including the Memphis Area Transit Authority, also known as MATA, which is in my district, face challenges in funding their operating expenses with fares. I recognize an increased federal funding for operating expenses risks a deficit for capital expenses. This is precedented as funding for the FAA has historically prioritized the agency's operations account at the expense of its facilities and equipment account. But public transit systems are expensive to run, and they should be funded by a partnership between agencies, local and state and federal governments. That's why I'm pleased to co-sponsor with my friend Representative Hank Johnson the Stronger Communities Through Better Transit Act, which would take a balanced approach to remedy operating expense shortfalls without diverting too much funding away from capital expenses. I understand the history of it and I understand the thoughts, but if we put all this money into capital and we don't have people riding, we're not using the capital. And we've got to have the system work, and that's going to take fares and other investments to make sure we have public transit systems. Mr. Regan, some would argue that public transit is a local problem or a local issue, and its operating expenses should be funded locally. Could you elaborate on how the benefits of public transit go beyond just its surface area and why federal and state funding could be helpful to the whole region?
Yes, and thank you for the question. I mean, we've recognized for over 60 years that public transit is a national interest, that we have a responsibility to provide federal support for these programs. They keep our economies moving. They provide vital services for people, whether they are elderly, disabled, or just are unable to afford a car, to be to get to where they need to be, whether it be to jobs, to medical appointments,
groceries.
Exactly. And so, we have a requirement to support these communities, whether they are large or small, to ensure that they have the resources they need to provide a vital public service to their constituents.
My city, like many major urban areas, have lots of food deserts. So people do have problems getting to a grocery store, and they need public transit, and it takes a long time, and for their health care appointments, because there are health care deserts. It's an issue the federal government should be involved in, state governments, in my opinion. Supposing that they were expanded, the federal funding for operating expenses, how can we ensure that agencies don't simply shift funds around and take capital expenses, take it out of capital expenses, and increase this backlog?
Well, I think one way to do it is that you have separate pots of money. So you have different grant programs where you can apply for operating assistance through one pool of money, and you can apply for capital through another pool of money. That provides agencies with the flexibility they need to identify what their needs are at the moment. Whether it is, there may be in a situation where we just need to refleet our bus program, and that capital expense is going to be vital for them to do that. There may be other situations where there's a shortfall, there's a gap in their funding, and they need to have operating assistance, or they need to be able to expand services to areas that are being underserved, in which case you can apply for an operating assistance grant. So there are different ways to do it, so you're ensuring that people are actually being targeted to what the needs of the agencies are in that moment.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Maynard, you are not only Vegas, but also the American Public Transportation Association representative here. Do you believe that it would be helpful to many communities to have federal funding available for operating funds, expenses, as well as capital?
Thank you, Chris, for that question. On behalf of APTA, we've listened to the members. Again, it's very important. You have some of the smaller rural transit systems that absolutely rely on the operating assistance, so they can use their federal funding for operating. Where urbanized, it's much more restricted. I think it really, first and foremost, you've got to make sure that whether it's a rail car, a bus, light rail, you've got to make sure that's in good working order, so it's reliable, so that it can pick up those folks and take them where they need to go. So it is really a balance, and I think that flexibility is important. Some agencies will find, based on their capital replacement program, the timeline that they need to invest in capital rather than potentially add a new route. So it is that flexibility that I think is key. We continue to listen to the members of APTA. We haven't taken a formal position, but do believe flexibility is very important in this category.
Do you have any idea what percentage of public transit authorities are able to run on just their fares?
That would be zero. Again, it's a business. It does not generate a profit. It never That's just the way, it is a public good, similar to how we're funding roadways and aviation and public safety. It's an investment in transit, it's an investment in your community.
Thank you, ma'am, and thank you to the whole panel.
Gentleman yields. Mr. Kiley.